Good evening. The news today is dire. The American llama pox has made its way through Europa into the Russian Confederation. The Chinese Empire has decided to close all of its borders to the Russian Confederation. However, as one scientist said, and I quote, life, finds a way. So unfortunately, dire news for those who are seeking to escape the plagues ravaging our poor world. In other news, the 50 Nations and Emerald Creek people are going to send their best doctors to help those in the Russian Confederation. However, sailing on the ocean is very tumultuous, as the people of Avalon have not been heard of for quite some time. In this dire world, we desperately are in need of heroes. In other news, we're going to have a quick discussion on genre.
Good New Year, and I hope everybody is doing well today. We're going to talk about genre and how it is a starting point, a foundation to any kind of writing that you're going to do. Whether it be a book, a short story, even a screenplay, you need to know some basic things. And a lot of people will say, well, why do I care about a genre? I'm just going to write what I'm going to write. It doesn't matter. And I'm just going to go with it, which you certainly can do. There's nothing wrong with being a pantser. Go out there and write what you're going to write. But genre has certain foundations that if you know what you're writing for, it can really help you. So genre is a category of writing. You know, you talk about science fiction, there's certain things that are gonna be in science fiction. If you're writing a fantasy, there's gonna be some things that are gonna be in fantasy. Even if you're writing romance, you have to have certain kind of things. Otherwise, it's not a story in that genre. And the readers, when they're reading these stories, are going to want these things to be in this story that they're going to read. So, for instance, science fiction, does it have aliens, spaceships, lasers? Nuts and bolts. You need to have some sort of things that are put together for science fiction to really work. Fantasy, is there elves of 20 different flippin' kinds? Are there monsters and 15 types of dragons? You have to know these things. And the sword, is that the sword of the ancient king? Is that armor forged by the dwarven smiths of yore? That's important. Romance has to have romance. Do you have a romantic subplot in your story? It's not a romance. Romance is the point and the whole point of that genre. So descriptions. When you're doing descriptions in your stories, genres have certain things that they want to have. In the olden times, back in the 50s, writing for science fiction was very clinical. It was very scientifically descriptive, but it was kind of dry. There wasn't a whole lot of, flowery language. Whereas your fantasy stories, Tolkien's going to talk about for 10 pages how this naughty bush is so naughty and go into its genealogy from the ancient elvish empire and how that naughty bush, overthrew Aragorn's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And that's, it's a joke, but it does, there's certain things that fantasy has in it, and it's important that the world and the characters are very connected. And romance, are you describing the gown that she's wearing? Are you describing the clothes that she had on her the job where she's just a housekeeper and she hates it and the clothes are terrible, and now she's in a castle and she's got this amazing bodice that's about to get ripped apart? Well, you better describe it. You better describe it in flowery language. And if you don't put that flowery language in there, then your readers are going to say, hey, what is this? Is this a war drama? Is this a historical fiction? Is this literature even? So your characters in the old, science fiction stories back in the 50s, the scientific people were the main characters. The doctors, engineers, and they'd talk to each other in scientific language, and they would discuss things scientifically. When more modern science fiction from the 60s onward had, the Captain Kirk type. But that didn't happen a lot in the early science fiction because it was about science. Fantasy, sure, everybody's a hero. Everybody has some sort of special power. The chambermaid has that chamber pot plus 12 lightning damage that's going to kill, the poo dragon and, rescue the whole kingdom. Sure, why not? Whereas romance, women who need to be related to and fulfill that fantasy of the market demographic. So you got, romance that's put towards, middle class women who work. She's going to have a job. She's going to have kind of a dead-end career with a bunch of, things that she doesn't want to do. And then she goes to the castle. That's very important. So we care for genre because genre gives us certain limitations about what you can write about, and it sets expectations for your readers. And that's one of the things that's really important to start with is your reader and you have a contract. You're going to tell a story, they're going to read it. And if you don't enhance what they want to read about, downplay what they don't want to read about, then when they pick up your book, they might put it right back down and tell everybody that they know, hey, this sucks. So that can work with you if you know your genre and the collective culture around it. So you can go back to old movies, old TV shows, old short stories or books or whatever to really help them get in their head what you're talking about, and they'll be really excited about it. So in science fiction, you got to write about a planet fall in detail and the science of the planet. Hey, this one, rotates, it's tidally locked. So, there's only one side that's facing the sun and this one side that's not. So it's really cold on one side and it's really hot on the other. It's got this shadow ring around it that's in perpetual twilight. And that's a really important part. There are tons of science fiction stories that have that in there. So for fantasy, same kind of thing. Aragorn, he's the rightful king and he's going to be, put back on the throne and or hey, is this a bad government that it's a lich king and that needs to be overthrown? There's really important parts of your story that are going to be in there that people will roll with if you have that genre expectations in there. And, for fantasy, what kind of setting is it? Because I hate to tell a lot of writers this, but romance is not an easy genre to write in because you can have historical romance or fantasy romance or modern day romance. And if you don't have the chops to write in that, then you're not going to be able to sell a lot of books. And these romance writers sell a lot of books, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's a lot of good, fun, interesting literature written in that genre. So, you got limitations. What does your book have in it? Is it an alien? Is it in space? Boom, you got science fiction. So if you don't have that stuff, you got problems. Same thing with fantasy. If you've got magic and monsters and dragons, your reader's like, cool, I got this. I'm with you. I'm on your ride. But if you don't, then they're going to have problems and not really know where you're leading them. And one of the things you don't want to do is confuse or disappoint your reader early because then you've lost them. And if you try to do anything fun later, try to mix it up or do some different things, you might have not built that goodwill early with expectations and limitations that your genre puts on you. So with the romance, you better have a love interest, maybe 12, and they have to meet the main character so they can start the romance and start it early. If you do certain scenes, you're doing a science fiction landing on a planet and they start going down and it's white, hey, is that Hoth or is that the new salt planet? Are they in a spacesuit and they're walking around and it's green mist everywhere and they can't breathe it, and if they aren't in their spacesuit they'll die? Well, your readers already know what's up. They know that atmosphere is toxic. Maybe it's ammonia or methane or who knows what. So they won't pull out their D20 and start throwing disbeliefs at you. Fantasy novels, we see this all the time in video games especially, but when you're writing a short story or writing a book, that monster is, 300 feet tall and, it's unkillable and yada yada. And you got this little hero with a dinky sword and, but hey, that sword is magical. It was created by, the dwarven smiths 10,000 years ago, and it holds the soul of the fairy princess, and the hero was blessed by the queen of the forest. And so your reader is going to say, hey, this, 6'0" hero is going to be able to kill that 300-foot tall monster, and there's nothing wrong with that. And they're not going to just throw your book across the room and say, yeah, whatever. And with romance, you got people who are just not compatible. You would see these people in the real world and you just roll your eyes and say, yeah, whatever, they'll be together for all of 5 minutes. Whereas in a romance, they'll believe it. They'll get it. And they don't need a lot of hand-holding to explain all that. So it's shortcuts. That's what we're really talking about. It's shortcuts for helping you explain things quickly, efficiently, for making your writing interesting with some of the other stuff, so you don't have to spend 10 pages describing a, black chitinous-skinned alien. It's got a, a tail that's really spiky and sword-like, and its blood is kind of acidic. You already know what I was talking about 30 seconds ago. You already knew what kind of alien I'm describing. If I'm describing a giant dreadnought, half the people that have seen the new Star Wars movie already have something in their head, so you don't have to go on 20 pages describing that. So if I'm in a fantasy, I'm describing a fireball, you're going to look at me and say, okay, how many D6 am I rolling? So you're going to know. I say there's a dragon. You're going to say Eastern, Western. What color? Is it metallic? Is it chromatic? Is it Tiamat? You'll already know these things. And so that you can describe other parts, you can concentrate on other areas without having to do a lot of groundwork to do all that. So for romance, you got a guy, he's got a castle. Doesn't work, no job, no peasants work in the fields, and gosh, he's super nice to everybody. Well, okay, who lives like that? Who is this guy? That makes no sense. And so that's where your genre can really support you, so your readers will just throw their hands in the air like Crunk and just ride the roller coaster, wondering why Yzma's not having any fun. So, you're trying to mix and match genres. Nothing wrong with that. But here's some things that you can really have problems with and lose your readers. Steampunk. I love steampunk. I think it's awesome. There was a old video game back in the 90s, early 2000s, that was totally steampunk. I think it was what was called Arcanum, of science and magic, I think. And that was an amazing game, just because it was really in this cool new genre that there wasn't a lot about. But a lot of people did not like it because it was like, well, am I going science or am I going magic? They didn't know what to do, and it was too much mixing and matching. And so, some people, if they read a science fiction book and it has these magical forces and laser swords, they're not going to like it. They're going to say, hey, this is not what I'm here for. So you have a lot of, You see the Star Trek, Star Wars fans, fighting each other about that same kind of things right now. Same thing with fantasy. You have magic. And if you try to bring science into it, there are a lot of people not going to want to hear that. They're going to see you trying to put in, actual chemistry, and they're going to say, no, all chemistry, sure, I can deal with that. But actual chemistry and actual physics, I don't care how a dragon flies. I want the frickin' thing to fly. For your romance, that's one thing that I would say is important that a lot of people don't understand about romance. And I know some people that love the romance genre. You have to write about historical work and fantasy. I mean, you can do romance in anything. You just have to know how to write the stories. Is your description, plot, characters important? Sure, put it on a spaceship. Put it in a magical kingdom. Put it in a bar. They can do that. And that's really, I think, a cool part of the romance genre. So, is your story actually in the genre? If your story is a quaint little fishing village, there's no spaceships, no aliens. You got a guy who's on a little boat, and he's going to go out to the sea, and he's going to catch him a fish. Is this science fiction? Is this guy got no magic? There's no monsters. Maybe there's a big fish, but that's it. Maybe some sharks, that's it. Is this really fantasy? Is there a government to overthrow? Does he care about a government? No. Well, hey, are you really just writing Old Man in the Sea, and you're writing a historical fiction, literature fiction type of book? So romance, do you even romance, bro? Is this historical fiction, or is there actual romance in it? Is there actual plot points and details that are important to that genre considerations? So your readers are expecting things out of your book. You're making a contract with them. You're saying, this is the kind of story I'm going to put out there. Do you want to read it? And the readers are going to say to you, hey, I'm working with you on this, and I'll go with you if you answer these questions. So science fiction readers are going to want to know, hey, how does dark matter work? If I get too close to a black hole going, faster than the speed of light, what happens? How does that work? And if you answer these questions interestingly, even if your science kind of sucks, they'll work with it. They'll have a good time, and that's what's important. You watched 3 movies about how this rightful good and just ruler was brought back to the throne. And sure, there were 8 endings after that, but you really wanted to see Aragorn become, the king of men, because that was a good plot point. And if you don't go through with that plot point and don't really make it part of your story, that's what the reader was looking for in the beginning. And with romance, it's not just about will they or won't they? It's about how do they? Who's in their way? Who do they have to move around? What kind of social expectations are they defying? What kind of, family expectations are they defying to be a part of this tragic love story? It's very important. So when we're talking about plots, let's discuss 2 types of plots. Linear plots, point A to point Q. They're going to, start at the village. They're going to go to the spaceport. They're going to fly on a plane to the big ship. They're going to take the big ship, fight the aliens, blow up the alien mothership. And then that's pretty much it. There's not going to be 10 other endings where they're in the inn and then they're in the village and all that. That's a circular plot where the hero, Bilbo goes out, does a bunch of cool things, comes back in. That's the typical hero's journey monomyth as you might have seen on the internet. It goes around, it comes back to you. So for fantasy, that's very important for those types of stories to have that circular plot, so you can see the hero go out, be changed, come back a different person, and live not only in the world of the village, but also the world of the hero. And then for romance, how are they going to, get the main character's love? How's that going to work? And if you start killing off your main characters and start a war, well, that's not a romance anymore. That's a historical fiction book. So genre is a foundation, and if you make it a straitjacket, absolutely it'll be a straitjacket. But if you know how to use it well, use it wisely, it can become a smashing smoking jacket, so you can really do a lot of cool things within those guidelines. And you can bring your readers by the hand to some really cool places if you work to help their expectations become realized and then go way past their expectations so they really get something new and interesting out of that genre. So, hope you had a good time. Please like, subscribe, and share. Have a wonderful new year, and we'll talk to you next time.